but understanding money. Like, what is money? Where does it come from? Who issues it? Why is my purchasing power decreasing every year, even though I'm working harder and harder? And I understand the solution. And now I need to share the solution with as many people as possible. I think more nations will follow suit, but we will start to see first nations that are furthest from the money printer, the ones that have had severe currency crises. I wouldn't be surprised to see a country like Argentina, but I think it's the ones that have the most trouble with their own currencies. That are not on a dollar standard. There have been some rumblings on Twitter that he might talk about potentially having a strategic Bitcoin reserve if he was elected president. And it's always exciting when you hear very powerful, influential voices start to talk about Bitcoin in a positive light. And overall, it's just going to be really exciting to see that we are moving in that positive direction of momentum to turn the entire country orange. It's going to be fun.
Hello and welcome to the Achieving Alpha podcast. My name is Stephen and I am the host of the show. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Natalie Brunell, who is the host of the Coinstories podcast. She is also a huge advocate of Bitcoin and spends a lot of her time on educating the masses on how to get involved in Bitcoin. Thank you for joining, Natalie. Really great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, how's everything with you today?
Everything's good, just gearing up for Bitcoin Nashville, which is the biggest Bitcoin conference in the world, and that's gonna be held next week. I can't wait for it. I hold a really big women's brunch there so that the women can come together and network and build community, which is really, really fun, and lots of amazing speakers this year as always.
It's really great to get more women into the space. And I heard that the big man himself, Donald Trump, is due to be at that conference. So that's going to be an eye-opening speech, I think.
We're really looking forward to it. There have been some rumblings on Twitter that he might talk about potentially having a strategic Bitcoin reserve if he was elected president. So I'm very curious to hear what he has to say. And it's always exciting when you hear very powerful, influential voices start to talk about Bitcoin in a positive light, but you always still wonder, how much do they really know? So I'm curious to see what he says about Bitcoin. And overall, it's just going to be really exciting to see that we are moving in that positive direction of momentum to turn the entire country orange. It's gonna be fun.
Yes, let's turn the whole world orange, Natalie.
Thank you.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting for him to be at that conference, especially after what happened with him last week at his rally. So, yeah, looking forward to that with bated breath. So, really great to have you on today, Natalie. I really enjoy your podcast that you do, your YouTube channel. You have a lot of great guests from all over the Bitcoin space. And I think really there's probably nobody better than explaining Bitcoin in simple terms to the masses and educating people. So, real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. That's really nice. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I thought it was really good because it's the first time that you've joined the podcast. I thought it would be really good if you could just explain a little bit more about your background, because before we delve into why you got into Bitcoin, I think it's important to know a little bit more about your story because that really shapes how you got involved in Bitcoin.
Sure. So I'll start at the very beginning. I was born in Poland. My parents grew up under communism, and my mom, especially, always dreamt of coming to the United States for the economic opportunity in search of the American dream. There wasn't a lot of hope or opportunity in Poland, and there wasn't social mobility where you could accumulate wealth for yourself and move up and take care of your family. And so she really wanted to come to the US. She tried every year for a visa lottery. It never worked out until she was 38 and my dad was 41, and they finally were able to come to America. And at that point, I give them a lot of credit. I think it took a lot of courage because they didn't know the language, they had no connections, and they decided to just take a chance and move their children. I was 5, my brother was 16, and start over. And they did. They worked really, really hard, and that's as a child, that was the biggest impression that was made upon me, that my parents are willing to work so hard and sacrifice so much just for their children to have a better life. And so many people do that. And the American dream represents this, I think, universal concept that you can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter your background and who your parents were, what nation you were born in, because a lot of you can't control those things, right? But you can control what happens to you in your destiny. You can control the work that you put in and your determination and your motivation, and you can make your dreams come true. And I think that's such a powerful, inspiring message that my family really believed in. And so I watched my parents work really hard, and we were finally able to afford a really small townhome outside of Chicago. And I went off to college, and the great financial crisis hit, and my parents lost everything. It was just horrible timing. And what was sad about it is I didn't understand the system at the time, but I could recognize that something was really unfair because all the bankers were getting bailed out. But people like my parents who had worked really hard and been good citizens, paid their taxes, played by all the rules, they lost everything. And I think that fueled me in my journalism career because after college, I started to become a reporter, and I was very set on holding powerful people accountable. I wanted to do investigative work, and I wanted to make an impact because I felt like there was an injustice in the system, and, so I pursued that career for a long time, which I think in many ways prepared me for communicating the Bitcoin message because I had to learn a lot about very different things and break them down into 30-second sound bites. And I discovered Bitcoin in 2017 while I was a reporter in a small city in California, and like so many people dismissed it. I thought, well, it's digital, it can be hacked, this could be a scam or a Ponzi scheme, I could lose everything. And then I had to really humble myself and go on a journey of not just understanding Bitcoin and the technology, right? Proof of work and mining, but understanding money. Like, what is money? Where does it come from? Who issues it? Why is my purchasing power decreasing every year, even though I'm working harder and harder? And that was truly an amazing journey because I realized that I finally understand all the problems and I understand the solution. And now I need to share the solution with as many people as possible.
Great. And could you remember like a moment? Because I think a lot of people who are involved in Bitcoin, there was a moment where they kind of really got it, where they thought, right, I think Bitcoin's going to be around for the future and it's going to be the money of the future.
Certainly. For me, it was reading The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Ammous that made the biggest impression on me. Like I said, I was very skeptical and dismissive of Bitcoin and too afraid to put too much of my money in it. And then I read that book, and I just remember sitting back and I had to read it again right away because I was so shocked by how much I didn't know, how much I had to unlearn from my education and my career and what I thought I understood about the financial system and the economy. I had to really humble myself, and that's when I was more open to Bitcoin and realized that this is actually one of the greatest opportunities that we have, and thank goodness that it came when it did because we sort of, at least to me, it feels like we're at this inflection point, and the amount speed at which they were going to print money and intervene in the system was accelerating more and more after the great financial crisis. And so there was this exponential rise in the price of assets, and people's wages were not keeping up. And when you have that great divide, what does that lead to? Extreme populism and people getting polarized and frustrated and looking to someone to be their savior. And that's one of the reasons why I think our mission to educate people about Bitcoin is so important because right now, people are really turning against each other and turning toward politics and sometimes extremism. And they don't realize that actually beneath them, there's this very broken system of money and incentives. And it doesn't matter which party we elect, it sort of has to continue in order to sustain itself. We have to issue more and more credit. And the one fix is to return to a system of sound money that can't be manipulated and isn't controlled by a small amount of people. So that's why I think it's so important for people to really learn about Bitcoin because I do see it as hope for us to move from this very polarized, divided world into one that's more cooperative and that creates a lot more value for one another.
I do think it's very important for people to understand the history of money. And I think that's where Saifedean's book comes in very good for new people coming into the space because Without that, I think people see Bitcoin as a speculative asset. They're looking at it purely at the price. But when you look back and you see the history of money, you realize why Bitcoin's needed and why we need these sound money principles. So, what are the main characteristics of Bitcoin that really attracted you to the asset over other different asset classes like gold and other asset classes?
Yeah, I would say 2 are the most important to me. One of them is the absolute scarcity. And just when you really learn about the technology, I didn't understand a lot about actually the internet prior to Bitcoin. I had to study the internet and TCP/IP, how all of these computers essentially speak the same language and communicate with one another in this decentralized network that is the internet with no headquarters, no CEO, no board of governors, right? I often compare Bitcoin to that. And so the scarcity I think is really important because we've never had absolute scarcity really in anything, especially digital scarcity. And the idea that, Satoshi Nakamoto standing on the shoulders of all these other great developers was finally able to create something where you can literally send it digitally from one wallet to another and it leaves you and it's a bearer instrument in the digital world. I just think that's so incredible, and the fact that no one can manipulate the supply. So that number, 21,000,000, is set in stone forever. No one will be able to inflate your savings and destroy your purchasing power. That is the number that's going to remain for eternity. And then the second is decentralization, which I sort of alluded to, the idea that no one can control this. The reason that it will remain 21,000,000 is because the incentives system is set up so that we're all sort of in competition to provide value within this network and also to check and verify everything. And there is a central point of failure. There's no one who can gain a lot of influence and change the protocol. It's truly like a virus that has spread across the entire world, and now everyone is incentivized to keep that network going and building and growing stronger and more secure. So those are 2 very important properties that we don't see in any other form of money because you can always mine more gold, you can always print more fiat, and our monetary systems around the world, no matter what currency you're talking about, are centralized, and there's a central bank, one node that you have to lean on that can decide everything from the interest rates to the actual supply of units, and that's wrong. We've seen over time we haven't learned our lesson, but we've seen over time that really impoverishes the average person, and it creates a system where very few benefit at the expense of everyone else.
And no one's waiting for Jerome Powell to tell everybody the supply schedule for Bitcoin, like he does with his interest rate.
Yeah, right, there's no Fed chair.
Yeah. Okay. And it's good for orange pilling people all over the world. So I wanted to talk about Bitcoin education. I know that you're very big on that in doing education for Bitcoin to the masses. How do you convey that message? Because there's lots of different people involved in Bitcoin now. It's not just the kind of retail investor, the new buyers that are coming into the market. There's also the institutional investor, obviously, that's been attracted by these Bitcoin ETFs that have been approved this year. How do you go about educating the masses from different levels of competency?
Well, it's challenging because you really have to approach everyone differently based on their current experience with money, honestly. The person who has done very well in fiat, maybe they've been very successful investing in things like real estate. They have a lot more walls up when it comes to digesting the message of Bitcoin, even if it's just 1% to 2%, is something I've found. And that is a very different message and tactic than someone who maybe lives in another country, a developing nation, and they have very little access to banking, or it's very difficult to save, or the inflation rate of their currency is very high. You have to approach people sort of where they are. And one of the things that I've learned over the last few years is it actually helps to start first by asking questions, asking what people value when it comes to their economic situation. How do they save? Where do they think that money comes from? Who issues it? And why is the purchasing power decreasing when all of us know that technology is supposed to make our lives easier? This is something that is so core to Jeff Booth's thesis. Technology is supposed to make us more productive, it's supposed to drop costs. So, why is everything getting more expensive every year? Why is a home that is 30, 40, 50 years old more expensive than when it was brand new built, right? New construction. So we have to start to ask ourselves these questions, and when you start posing these exercises to newcomers, then they start to go on a curiosity journey and they start to ask questions about how Bitcoin solves some of these things. And I understand that people are skeptical at first. We all were. In fact, I respect that. I think that's a good thing. If you're just ready to throw your life savings into a new form of money, that's probably not good. But I would say my biggest advice is just meet people where they are. Ask them thoughtful questions and really listen to them and allow them to ask you questions about Bitcoin. It's not productive to shove it down their throats. No one likes to be taught anything in that method.
Yeah, I think it's important to ask questions because, like you were saying, your main things are scarcity, and your other thing is decentralization. Those were the two selling points for you for Bitcoin. But for other people, it could be the different attributes that they value. So asking those questions first does go a long way. And I'm guessing there's some differences as well in terms of the generations that you're actually trying to educate, because some of the older people in the space, they might not understand the technology so well. And the millennials, as you'll probably know, Natalie, I think you are a millennial, just like me, that we also have our own challenges. What are the challenges between the different generations and getting them involved in Bitcoin?
Sure. Well, obviously, younger generations, we're so used to being online all the time. We're digitally native, and we feel more comfortable with the idea of digital money because we've really only ever interacted with our bank accounts electronically. And for older generations, and I would put my mom in this category of skepticism, it's a little bit unnerving trying to wrap your head around something that is there's no physical element to it at all. You can't touch it, you can't hold it, you can't withdraw it and put it in your closet, you know? And there's something a little bit scary about that. But I think the way that you can make people comfortable is helping them realize just how little we actually interact with any sort of physical money today. And even let's say stocks, right? A lot of people, especially older generations, they've done really well investing in equities. They do believe that stocks should be a huge chunk of your portfolio. Well, the equities that have performed the best over the last couple of decades have been technology companies that rely on algorithms. How can you touch the algorithm of Google, right? And these AIs that are quickly developing and becoming ubiquitous in our lives. Those are things that are also digital. But yet, because there's some sort of company behind it with human beings, we feel more comfortable putting our money in the stock as opposed to Bitcoin, which is a network that no one can ever control, kind of like investing in literally the internet. So I sometimes like to help people bridge that gap because so many of the things that we do find value in today are completely digital. You can't touch the social media videos that you're scrolling through them, but they're digital. You can't physically hold them. And so many things in our lives have already moved into this sphere. And so money is the natural next step. We're going to have a digital money. And I think that it should be one that a small group of people are not in charge of and that they can't raise or lower interest rates to meet their ends and their agenda. It's one that we all are a part of and can access in a fair way so that we can compete with one another based on the value that we provide as opposed to who's closest to the people who get to issue the money.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's a good way to look at it, especially with the technology, because as you said, the internet is actually a network. And yeah, very similar to Bitcoin. And then even if we look at other things like physical assets, really what housing's become is like a digital savings account, really, hasn't it? I mean, the value of houses aren't really the value of what people live in, the price that they are, because people are trying to keep their money away from inflation in their bank accounts. So that makes a lot of sense. So I also wanted to ask you about how we can get more women into the Bitcoin space, because I think that there are gradually becoming more women in the Bitcoin space, but obviously number of men far outweighs the number of women in the space. What do you think could attract women to the Bitcoin space, and what are some of the challenges in doing that?
Well, I think women will attract women to the Bitcoin space, and I've been really passionate about this because some people know my story that I went to my first Bitcoin conference in 2021. I brought my best girlfriend who was not a Bitcoiner at the time, and we looked across this massive convention center, and we were hard pressed to find another woman. We did, there were a handful here and there, but it was kind of disheartening to me because I think that this is such a powerful, important mission and movement and revolution. And my peers, my girlfriends, my friend groups who are women, they are passionate about saving for their future and taking care of their families and planning for their retirement and purchasing the home that they dream of. So why are they not in this room talking about the greatest money that ever existed? And so I decided to create this Women of Bitcoin brunch. The first one was held in 2022, and we didn't know what interest we would have. I partnered with Callie Bailey, David Bailey's mom from Bitcoin Inc., who's wonderful. And we basically sold, I mean, the tickets are free, but they were all grabbed, and we had 100 women that first year. Last year, we had 200. This year, we'll have 300, and we have a wait list of over 100 women. So next year, we might have to have, I don't know, 500 women as the capacity. We've got to find a bigger location. But it's just so exciting to see because I think we we are more comfortable and feel more welcome when we can relate to someone that is sharing a message. I know that when I was young, when I wanted to be a journalist, I would look to journalists that I felt I could relate to, right? I wanted to see women. I wanted to see women who looked like me and sounded like me, and it made me feel like I could do it too. And I think it's the same for Bitcoin. When people see women empowered, other women will want to join this network and this community. And I think we need to encourage each other and support each other because women bring a beautiful, nurturing community aspect to it. I think women are very interested in people and forming bonds. And I think that's something that the community really needs. And I'm just so excited because we really are moving in the right direction, and I can't wait to see all the women at the Women of Bitcoin brunch this year because it's something that's growing very quickly, and we need to have these events all over the world so that more and more women can feel seen and heard and get involved.
And I think it's really great we get as many women involved in Bitcoin as possible, really. And I think it might stop a lot of the arguments that go on Twitter if there's some feminine influence on the platform.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I think that women sometimes get stereotyped as being catty and fighting with one another, but if you go on Bitcoin X, it is the guys that are doing that. It's like that scene in Mean Girls where everyone's, like, fighting each other in the cafeteria, and the ladies are all very yeah, the ladies are all very pleasant, and they're the ones that break up the fight, so yes, we definitely I think we would bring more peace and harmony to Bitcoin if we had more women.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But I think it's quite natural, especially in the early stages of the technology, to have the majority of men, and hopefully that changes over time. Because I think it's a common problem. I think it's a common problem in finance. It's a common problem in tech companies that are operating. That there's more men than women. But yeah, the more women that can be attracted to the space, the better. Yeah. Okay. And on your past experience in media, how do you find the differences and the evolution of what we've been from traditional media, so the big broadcasters and the big news channels, where you came from previously in your career, to this kind of new world of YouTube and making your own authentic content? How do you see that it's evolved?
Well, like everything, there are 2 sides. There are great things, and there are things that we have to be more observant and careful about. First of all, it provides a tremendous amount of opportunity. I would not be able to be doing what I'm doing if not for the democratization and the decentralization of media. The fact that I can really sit in my home and broadcast a message and people can relate to it and listen to it and follow it and share it and have it go viral, that's incredible and something that wasn't possible just a couple of decades ago. But because everyone can do this, We're saturated with a lot of information and content, and you have to be really discerning and make sure that you are cross-checking and verifying in the spirit of Bitcoin. Don't trust, verify, because there is a lot of information out there and you're not sure who is funding it or what the agenda is, or if someone's just giving their total opinion. There are a lot of lies out there from both traditional media as well as alternative media. And so you just have to be a little bit more careful. But overall, I think the evolution is one that I wish I leaned into a little bit earlier. I was someone who I was very much afraid to break out of the mold of legacy media because there was some sort of security and stability in my job with a network news outlet as opposed to just being on my own, having to build from scratch. But like most things, like starting any business, being your own boss comes with so many challenges, but it's also incredibly empowering and you learn so many lessons and you learn from the failures. And it's really an exciting time because literally anyone can do it today. You can pick up um, technology that isn't too expensive and you can start to broadcast the message that you want to share. So it's been really, really exciting. And I've seen that a lot of people are actually turning their trust to the alternative media sources as opposed to the legacy ones that people feel have not done a good job being neutral and holding the powerful accountable.
Or do you find it quite liberating? Because from what I understand of the US networks, there's often an affiliation with a political party, or there's a way that they put across messages depending on what network they are. Do you find it quite liberating that you can make your own authentic content, which is your true views and not that of a network?
I do. Throughout my career, I felt like for the most part, I was able to be true to myself and report the stories in the way that I thought was the most fair and balanced. But there were also times where I felt a pressure or I felt like a network that I worked for was leaning one way or another, which again, I don't think is okay for journalism. It's okay for opinion shows and editorial content, but not okay for journalism. And it did make me feel uncomfortable. So it was sort of a mixed bag because at times I felt like I was doing the noble work of journalists, and at other times I felt like I was not sharing some of the sides of a story that needed to be told so that people can make their own decisions. And now I don't have to worry about that because I can be true to myself, and there is so much freedom and empowerment in that because with Bitcoin too, I don't want it to be politicized. I think that whether you are super passionate on one side of the political spectrum or another, you can embrace the principles and the values that Bitcoin stands for because they're very universal principles. I mean, freedom. Is that real only for the left or the right? I think it's for everyone, right? It's just the idea that you can save for your future, that you can do whatever you dream of. Again, that these are things that I think embody what we all believe in. But right now we're so divided on many ideological issues. And I hope we can separate from those so that we can focus on really the things that matter and return to sort of a rule of law. And that's one thing that I really love about Bitcoin because it's a set of rules with no rulers, right? So we all abide by these rules that rely on math and thermodynamics and the laws of the universe, as opposed to these powerful people who get to make up the rules. And sometimes the rules don't apply to them. I don't like that. So Bitcoin really gives me hope that we will enter a new era that's more prosperous and abundant for us all.
Yes. Yes, I totally agree with that. And I think that there's some views that in the US that the Republicans are much more Bitcoin friendly than the Democrats, etc. I think it just depends on who you talk to within those parties. I don't think it's as divided as the public opinion is. Do you think that it's quite important that Donald Trump and the new potential Vice President Vance are warming to Bitcoin? And do you think that could have a kind of a rolling effect on other politicians in the US?
Well, I definitely think it's a positive development. Always. I mean, when influential people embrace Bitcoin and talk about how much they love it, that is super exciting. But I'm also always cautiously optimistic, especially when it comes to politicians, because again, we have a system at its core that is so broken and it allows people to concentrate power. It allows for the manipulation of our currency in our current system. It has a broken incentive structure. And so it makes me wary whenever people within that system are loving Bitcoin because let's wait and see. Let's really wait and see. Let's see what their plans are. My optimism comes from the fact that what we're hearing from actually multiple candidates is that they will protect the right to self custody. I think that is so, so important. I think nation states and governments embracing Bitcoin is inevitable, but it can't be in a way where only certain institutions and entities can hold it for you and you can't. So I just want to make sure that anyone who gets into office really does protect the right to self custody and the right for us to use it and not in a way that's overly burdensome when it comes to taxes. There's some legislation that's being put forth so that, you know, under a certain limit, it's tax free, tax exempt, so that we can actually transact with Bitcoin, right? Wouldn't it be great if you can sell a little bit? Let's say you want to make a big purchase like a house, and under a certain amount, that's not subject to capital gains tax. That would be amazing for so many people that are trying to take the next step in their financial journeys. So, again, I'm hopeful, I'm cautiously optimistic, but we have to kind of wait and see how this all pans out.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there because you don't want that single point of failure, which Bitcoin tries obviously so hard to avoid. But I think some of the messages are quite positive. All of those jobs that the exchanges and Bitcoin ecosystem companies who have gone offshore, they might be attracted back to the US again, and there might be a little bit more friendly of Bitcoin related companies in there. So yeah, I think that will be quite good. I also wanted to ask you about the effect of the Bitcoin ETFs that were approved this year. How massive was that for the Bitcoin space, and what effect do you think it's going to have on the future of Bitcoin?
Well, I think it was landmark in terms of just the legitimization of this asset class, and it made it more convenient and easy for more people to access Bitcoin. There are a lot of firms and institutions that were not able to purchase spot Bitcoin. And now, with a click of a button, they can invest in these ETFs, which drives more adoption and more demand for Bitcoin. So, maybe it's a first step. Maybe the people who are in these firms and institutions will eventually, as individuals, purchase spot Bitcoin and take self custody. But I think everything is really good for Bitcoin. The fact that people can more easily allocate in their 401k portfolios and their money managers can allocate to this asset class, pension funds, RIAs. It's really exciting for Bitcoin, I think. And again, sometimes you need to get your feet a little bit wet, and when Bitcoin is now so convenient and people see the positive change that it has for their portfolios for the better, right? Sometimes a 1 to 2% position all of a sudden turns into 20% and you need to decide how much more you want to put in there. I just think that's really exciting. And it gives people this notion that, oh, I should maybe pay attention a little bit more to Bitcoin. Maybe I need to study it. Maybe as an individual, I need to buy some. And so I think that these ETFs it's just we're at the beginning. We're at the very beginning. A lot of the firms, my understanding is they're not even able to allocate yet. They have to go through a process. They might have to vote to be able to add this to their portfolios or change their charters. So that's going to take a little bit of time. That wave hasn't really fully come yet. But when it does, that's really great for Bitcoin.
Yeah. And we saw that when the gold ETFs were approved, it took quite a long time to get those inflows in. So I think those inflows into the Bitcoin spot ETFs were unprecedented, actually. I think they were a lot higher than a lot of people expected. And there's many people who we often say that is really great for people to self custody, but that's not for everybody, right? There are certain people that might not want to self custody and might have the trust of these institutions, and it might be a lot easier for them to allocate funds in ETFs.
Well, I think that self-custody is for everyone, but I do believe that if people don't want to, that's their personal choice. They need to acknowledge that they're taking on a little bit more risk. At the end of the day, Bitcoin was created and given to us so that we can remove counterparties. We can remove the risk that comes with trusting other people because our system and our history is proof that trust sometimes it lets us down and we end up with these financial bubbles and more concentration of wealth and power. So I just urge people to be careful. I know that it is more convenient, but sometimes the thing that's more convenient is actually the thing that carries more risk, and it's not difficult. I think so many people see it as a hurdle because they think that there's some super technical component to self-custody that makes it out of reach for them, especially if they're not savvy with technology. But literally anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. It's just a few steps. It's not difficult at all. And I just urge people to at least take the time to learn before they make the decision to just place all their Bitcoin in the hands of a company.
And I noticed, I think it was last year, you went to El Salvador, right?
2 years ago now.
Oh, was it a couple of years ago now? Okay. All right. What is your views on the long term of nation states adopting Bitcoin? Obviously, you saw how it was rolled out in El Salvador. Do you expect that to be rolled out in other countries? And what were your experiences of when you visited El Salvador?
Yeah, so I'll address my visit to El Salvador first because I didn't know what to expect. In fact, so many people texted me when I was going there, and they said that they're worried about me, that they heard it's so unsafe, and I never felt unsafe when I was there. So sometimes impressions or the things we read or hear aren't exactly true. Sometimes you need to find out for yourself. I thought that the country was really beautiful. The people were so kind. I asked literally everywhere I went. I stayed in both San Salvador in the capital, a big city, as well as in El Zonte and Bitcoin Beach, a tiny community on the shore. And I was asking everyone what they thought about Bitcoin, what they thought about Bukele. And overwhelmingly, I was getting really positive responses. Here and there would be some people who were really skeptical or didn't understand Bitcoin, but almost everybody I talked to loved Bukele. And the people who knew about Bitcoin, they wanted to accept it for whatever that they were selling. They wanted to use it. They saw it as a way to save for the future. They knew that it was bringing a lot of attention on the country and bringing more tourism and helping their GDP. So it was really overall positive and inspiring what can happen when you have a leader who is determined to fix the economic situation from which stems so many of the problems, right? El Salvador was known for so long to be like the murder capital of the world. Well, I am one of the people who believes that a lot of these crimes and the decay of morality stems from the decay of an economic situation and the fact that people have no hope and they are so desperate that they resort to these things. And so when you start to turn that around and people do have hope and opportunity, in fact, I talked to a lot of people who wanted to come back from where they immigrated to, and like the US, they wanted to come back to El Salvador because they saw hope in the future there. That starts to change things, and that's really exciting. So I think it's an experiment I wanna keep watching because it seems to be going in the right direction. Again, always be wary of politicians, but Bukele can never control Bitcoin. He can't increase the supply cap from 21,000,000. He can't centralize it, so it's really exciting to see someone like him embrace Bitcoin. And I think that other nations, to your second question, I think more and more nations will follow suit, but we will start to see First Nations that are furthest from the money printer, the ones that have had severe currency crises. I wouldn't be surprised to see a country like Argentina, although it's a very big one. It would be a very bold move. But I think it's the ones that have the most trouble with their own currencies, that are not on a dollar standard and don't have the stability of maybe Western nations. They will, I think, move to the Bitcoin standard first, and that will be great for them because I think it will be an equalizer of sorts and give people in developing countries so much more opportunity than they had on the fiat standard.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that. All right. Okay. Last question I have for you. We've talked a lot about the positives about Bitcoin. What are some of the risks that you could see with Bitcoin long term? What are some of the things that could go wrong in order for it not to be the global standard in the future?
Well, so I actually don't worry about Coin, the network globally. I worry about individual nation states or cities or the places that you could live with leaders that can make the wrong decisions because they're not being thoughtful and humble. I think that Bitcoin will continue to thrive and grow globally, but there will be some forces that are against it and places that are not as easy to live in because they're going to try to suppress Bitcoin and the ability to maybe self custody, or they're going to put onerous tax laws in place. But I really do see hope in the fact that, I mean, look at what my parents did, right? The country that they lived in was not giving them the hope and opportunity that they wanted. So they moved. And I think that we will vote with our feet. I think Bitcoiners will go to places that embrace Bitcoin and love Bitcoin. And it might not be easy. It's not easy to uproot your family. But if I were to see the future as one where institutions or politicians tried to co-opt or tried to limit people's access to Bitcoin as a decentralized network and a self-custody bearer instrument, then it would make me think twice about wanting to live there and plant roots there and have my children grow up there, because I wanna live in a place that really represents freedom, that really embraces the individual and doesn't try to impose its rules or coerce people into something that isn't fair. So we'll see. That's the only thing I worry about. I don't worry about Bitcoin, the network. I worry about people in certain nation states maybe making it harder. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. Okay, and you're quite well known in both the finance space and in the Bitcoin space, but if people want to hear more about you, Natalie, what's the best way to reach you and find out more about you?
Sure. So I'm very active on X at Nat Brunell is my handle. And then my podcast is called Coin Stories. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. I also have a free newsletter that I put out with a weekly news wrap up on everything Bitcoin and the global economy. And just reach out. I love hearing from people. I love meeting people at these conferences. So I look forward to helping more people understand Bitcoin in the future.
Well, I'm an avid listener of your podcast. I really enjoy it. So I recommend that people who listen to this podcast, please subscribe to Natalie's Coin Stories podcast. And I'll leave the details in the description below. Thank you very much for joining the podcast today, Natalie. Really great to speak to you. And I wish you the best of luck for Nashville next week. And enjoy yourself and hope to have you on again in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it.